I think one of the most important missions with the film, from an observer on the outside, is establishment of setting. Establishment of world, especially when crafting something that's far outside the realm of possibility. It's a whole lot easier to create settings that hit close to home. Things more earthbound because of our inherent familiarity with those settings. It's easier to identify with the world being presented since we're actively living in that world. It's so much harder to do this with a universe meant to be completely alien and outside of our comprehension. You don't want it so far removed that it's hard to really latch onto it, but you don't want it so familiar that it just becomes real life. There's gotta be a balance of foreign and familiar when introducing a fantasy setting. Otherwise, you're gonna lose an audience before a narrative even starts. Star Wars, being released in 1977, was taking huge risks in combating the typical setting in Hollywood, which steeped itself entirely within the familiar. But Star Wars does the balancing act pretty perfectly, which is odd when you mention it because of how alien the films really are. The very nature of the galaxy is so robust and so far removed from what we know, but there's a layer of familiarity, or at least of image, that helps to keep it grounded a little bit. You're able to easily identify with images presented because of what they're meant to represent, or how they mirror things in our world. I think one of the best places to look for an example of this is Ralph McQuarrie's original artwork for the series, before George Lucas even pitched his screenplay to the executives of Fox. It's pretty well known at this point that Lucas isn't the best with words. His creativity and skills mostly come through the act of crafting, so to really sell the original idea for Star Wars, he needed some outside help. McQuarrie was able to bring to life a lot of the visuals for the story, showing grand scopes and designs for a world far past what anyone could possibly imagine, but somehow easy to translate and understand. Laser swords, evil Imperial forces, battles between dark and light. The story of Star Wars isn't that complicated. It mostly comes down to the world to convey a grand sense of scale, and the world is mostly conveyed through the set design. So translating those paintings into something tangible while also convincing audiences that it's an entirely different world, now that's tough. When A New Hope was in production, there wasn't a large amount of money that Lucas had at his disposal outside of what he had received from his previous film. The production team brought on board mostly had to build all of the props from scratch with readily available material, and the sets themselves were either on location or also built from scratch. Take a look actually at the opening sequence to A New Hope. The design of the interior of the Rebel ship works to the angle that I'm talking about here. It's this rounded corridor, smooth and futuristic with its many knobs and panels, along with the white layout. But add in the Rebel fighters wearing mostly contemporary outfits, and the more familiar aspects of the scene start to pop up. The practicality and design of the various ventilation systems, the ceiling lights, and the various panels along the wall, giving a sense of realism. This is clearly the future, but audiences are able to buy this future with how practical everything looks. Attention is in the details, and the fact that sense is put into the very design of Star Wars lends a lot more credence to its existence. Tatooine is probably my favorite setting of all of the original trilogy, maybe followed closely by Dagobah, if only because I just love the techniques used here to really introduce us to a whole new galaxy. The wide open deserts are familiar to us, but the feelings they invoke, that of isolation, desolation, and loneliness, they really hit close to home. It puts Luke Skywalker's plight into perspective. It really sells us on the idea that he's meant for greater things when he's standing against the wide and ever-expansive wastelands of his planet's deserts. The Death Star works kind of the same way, offering an oppressive and powerful view of the universe to the audience. Dark and tall ways, reflective surfaces, daunting heights. This scene, where Obi-Wan needs to shut down the base's tractor beam, is rife with peril. As opposed to the more smooth interiors of the Rebel ship shown in the first shot, the Death Star is a lot more intrusive on the characters. Various columns and spires jutting into frame, kind of closing the characters in, creating a more compact space that pushes inward. It feels so claustrophobic. Not to mention the steep pit that he has to balance himself over, which, by the way, that steep drop is an oil painting, blended seamlessly into the film through optical illusion and simple matte work. But it fits. It makes sense. The scene is instantly buyable, and it's little details where the production tried their hardest to make everything seem so much bigger and so intricately detailed that gave it that believability. The Millennium Falcon sets were all constructed from airplane scrap metal in pieces, which probably adds to the believability when seeing all of the internal piping and wires that make up the interior, as well as the external framework. It feels like an actually constructed ship, something you'd need to tune up in a garage every now and then. Lightsabers are built on the framework of flash guns, where some fine-tuning and tweaking give credence to a weapon that's easily buyable and makes sense. There's weight to the props and set designs that just makes sense. Not only to the world, but to the audience. It brings people in that much more when you're able to bring that level of trust between the film and the people watching it. So if you followed the channel for a while, you've probably heard me say a few times how I kinda miss the Star Wars machine. They're good movies, or at least some of them are, but I probably don't appreciate them nearly as much as the actual fans of the material. With all that said though, I think there's something to admire about how these movies are able to craft worlds so easily and have them be so readily accepted. They just make sense, both from a narrative standpoint and a universe building standpoint. And a lot of it just boils down to great set design and prop work, so much so that the universe seems that much more believable and grand at the same time. At the very least, Star Wars is a universe that can reach people even outside of its films, and that's definitely something to admire and appreciate in an age where banking off of universes seems to be all the rage. Star Wars was ahead of the game, in more ways than one.